Thou shalt.
Thou shalt.
Thou shalt start over and over and over again.
Thou shalt play.
Thou shalt embrace getting lost.
Thou shalt listen to the trees.
Thou shalt observe and absorb.
Thou shalt remember.
Thou shalt hear one another.
Thou shalt step into the circle.
Thou shalt safeguard the fire.
Thou shalt make breath sacred.
Thou shalt honor water and protect it.
Thou shalt uplift one another.
Thou shalt heal the earth.
Thou shalt feel the earth.
Thou shalt see the stars.
Thou shalt put your damn phone down.
Thou shalt imagine a future beyond the realities of the present.
Thou shalt recognize and reckon with your ancestors.
Thou shalt be comfortably uncomfortable with one another.
Thou shalt be patient, but hungry for change.
Thou shalt do no harm.
Thou shalt hold one another.
Thou shalt create opportunities for imagination to run wild.
Thou shalt teach one another.
Thou shalt have cold drinks on hot days and hot drinks on cold days.
Thou shalt welcome the stranger.
Thou shalt foster a community.
Thou shalt hold space for complexity.
Thou shalt pay attention.
Thou shalt sing.
Thou shalt make art.
Thou shalt self-preserve.
Thou shalt speak up for one another.
Thou shalt protect one another.
Thou shalt forgive.
Thou shalt atone.
Thou shalt be mentored.
Thou shalt mentor.
Thou shalt be of service.
Thou shalt let go of one another.
Thou shalt self-investigate.
Thou shalt take space.
Thou shalt make space.
Thou shalt create joy for one another.
Thou shalt dance.
Thou shalt clothe one another.
Thou shalt house one another.
Thou shalt feed one another.
Thou shalt see one another.
Thou shalt see one another.
Thou shalt feed one another.
Thou shalt house one another.
Thou shalt clothe one another.
Thou shalt dance.
Thou shalt create joy for one another.
Thou shalt make space.
Thou shalt take space.
Thou shalt self-investigate.
Thou shalt let go of one another.
Thou shalt be of service.
Thou shalt mentor.
Thou shalt be mentored.
Thou shalt atone.
Thou shalt forgive.
Thou shalt protect one another.
Thou shalt speak up for one another.
Thou shalt self-preserve.
Thou shalt make art.
Thou shalt sing.
Thou shalt pay attention.
Thou shalt hold space for complexity.
Thou shalt foster community.
Thou shalt welcome the stranger.
Thou shalt have cold drinks on hot days and hot drinks on cold days.
Thou shalt teach one another.
Thou shalt create opportunities for imagination to run wild.
Thou shalt hold one another.
Thou shalt do no harm.
Thou shalt be patient but hungry for change.
Thou shalt be comfortably uncomfortable with one another.
Thou shalt recognize and reckon with your ancestors.
Thou shalt imagine a future beyond the realities of the present.
Thou shalt put your damn phone down.
Thou shalt see the stars.
Thou shalt feel the earth.
Thou shalt heal the earth.
Thou shalt uplift one another.
Thou shalt honor water and protect it.
Thou shalt make breath sacred.
Thou shalt safeguard the fire.
Thou shalt step into the circle.
Thou shalt hear one another.
Thou shalt remember.
Thou shalt observe and absorb.
Thou shalt listen to the trees.
Thou shalt embrace getting lost.
Thou shalt play.
Thou shalt start over and over and over again. Thou shalt.
Thou shalt.